Hi there. Today we're going to talk about strategic top-down planning. And this is the CFO's blueprint. And I'm going to present it as a three-part video series. And in this particular part, we're going to talk about the art of top-down planning. And how do you set the strategic frame? So welcome. Today is about the CFO's most critical responsibilities, leading the top-down planning. And I'm going to start with a truth that makes people uncomfortable. Bottom-up planning alone does not do the work. So here's what I've observed over the years, and it happens with pure bottom-up planning. You go ahead and you ask each department what they think they can achieve and what resources they need. Sales, they say they can grow 30% if you give them 20 more reps. Marketing, they say they need to double their budget to support that growth. And then you have the product. They say they need 15 more engineers to build what sales is promising. So now you start adding it all up. And the company would need to raise, what, $50 million and still won't hit the board's growth expectations? So here's the thing. Bottom-up planning, it becomes a negotiation where every function, they ask for more resources and they commit to less aggressive targets. And it's rational behavior. Everyone is protecting themselves, but it produces mediocre plans. And you know why? Because they don't necessarily drive the business forward. And that's why you need top-down planning. And here is the key. The top-down planning is not about dictating unrealistic targets and forcing people to accept them. It's about setting the strategic frame. It's about defining what success looks like and then working collaboratively with the leadership team to build a realistic path to get there. So let me give you a personal example. I was working with a company where the board wanted 70 to 100% growth. 70 to 100% growth. When we did the bottoms-up planning, the functional leaders, they collectively committed to 45% growth. And the gap, it was enormous. And the CEO was feeling frustrated, the functional leaders were very defensive, and the planning process, it was going nowhere. So I stopped the process and said, guys, let's start differently. Let's agree on what we are trying to accomplish strategically and why. And then let's reverse engineer. Let's work backward to figure out how. We spent 2 hours at an exec offsite, and we were discussing what does 70 to 100% growth enable? What doors does it open? What happens if we only grow 45%? What is at stake? And once everyone understood the strategic context, that 100% growth would position us for a strong Series C. It will attract better talent, and it will establish market leadership. So the conversation changed. People stopped defending their bottom-up numbers and started asking, what would it take to get to 100%? What would have to be true? And that is a part of top-down planning. You are setting the strategic ambition first, and then you are collaboratively figuring out how to achieve it. Let me walk you through the framework for effective top-down planning process. So phase one, you have to define the strategic outcome. You don't talk numbers. Before you talk about numbers, talk about strategy. What are you trying to accomplish? Why does it matter? What does success look like, not just financially, but strategically? So I facilitate this by asking the exec team, 3 years from now, what does this company look like if we were successful? What market position do we have to have? What are the capabilities that we have to build? What milestones do we need to hit? So you paint the picture of success before you model the numbers. Then you move on to phase two, where you set the top-down financial targets. Based on this strategic outcome, what financial performance do you need? And this usually comes from a combination of board expectations, market opportunities, competitive positioning, financing timeline. And here's what this looks like. To achieve our strategic goals, we need to reach, let's say, $75 million ARR by the end of next year. That's 80% growth from our current $42 million. We need to improve our gross margin from 72% to 78% to show improving unit economics. And we need to get to cash flow break even in 18 months, which means we need to grow revenue faster than expenses. These become your top-down targets. They're ambitious, yes, but they need to be so to achieve the strategic outcome. Because if they are not, then it becomes arbitrary. The top-down planning is grounded in reality, grounded in the strategy. So if you look at phase 3, you test for feasibility and you look for the comfort. Are you comfortable with this target? Of course, people are not comfortable. It's a stretch target. So the right question is this feasible? What would have to be true for us to achieve this? I've observed that this reframing changes everything. Instead of yes, no, you're asking, what would it take? And that opens up problem solving instead of creating defensiveness across functions. So here's how I facilitate this conversation. And the question I ask is, to hit the $75 million ARR with 80% growth, we need to add about $33 million in net new ARR. So let's work backward. What mix of new customer acquisition and expansion revenue gets us there? What does that imply for sales capacity and marketing investment? Where does product fit in, and what are the capabilities of the product group? You're not telling people what to do. You're working with them to model what is required and pressure testing the feasibility of that ambition. Now let's look at phase 4, where you're identifying the key assumptions and investigating the enablers. Every ambitious plan, it rests on assumptions. Make them explicit. What has to be true for this plan to work? What capabilities do you need to build? What risks do you need to mitigate? So I created a simple framework with the team. And what was that framework? You identify the critical assumptions. So what are we assuming about conversion rates? What are we assuming about sales productivity and customer retention? What about market conditions? And what are the key enablers? What investments or what capabilities must we have in place for this plan to work? Also identify the major risk. What could derail the plan, and how do we mitigate those risks? And when you make these explicit, the conversation becomes more productive. People can challenge assumptions constructively and identify gaps in the plan early, and that's the key thing that we need to be aware of. In phase 5, you also have to create some negotiation space within the frame. Here's the key to making top-down planning work. You set the overall targets top-down, but you create space. You create space for negotiation on how to achieve them and what resources are required and to be deployed. So the frame is, we need to hit the $75 million ARR, and the negotiation space would be, what mix of new customers versus expansion can get us there? What is the sales capacity that we need? What marketing investment do we require? And what investments do we need to make into product to ensure that this happens? How do we phase the hiring to manage the cash flow? I've observed that when you start setting the destination and collaborate on the path, you get both ambition and buy-in. And so let me explain to you how this works. The top-down target was $75 million ARR. The head of sales initially said, I need 40 new reps to hit that number. I said, okay, let's model it. What if we improve rep productivity by 15% through better enablement, better tools? What if we increase average deal size by 10% through better packaging? What if we improve the win rates by focusing on higher probability segments? So we modeled all these various scenarios. And it turned out that we could hit the number with only 26 new reps, plus some operational process improvements, some tweaks in the process. Now, sales was obviously skeptical at first, but agreed the model was feasible if we invested in the enablement and the focus. And that, my friends, is a negotiation within the frame. So here's what I've learned about top-down planning. The goal is not to force unrealistic targets on your team. The goal is to set ambitious targets that reflect the strategic opportunity. And once you do that, then you collaboratively build a rigorous plan to achieve them. You are balancing aspiration with realism. You are balancing stretch with achievability. And when you do this well, you get the plans that are ambitious enough to drive real growth and transformation. You get the plans that are realistic enough that the team believes that they can execute. And you get the commitment, not compliance. So the next session will get tactical. I will show you exactly how to take inputs from the functional leaders, how to negotiate when there are gaps between top-down targets and bottom-up capacity, and how to build a financial model that makes the plan real and trackable. Thank you.